Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Josh Collacchi here once again with RotoCurve for your starting pitchers pitch for July 24th. Now it is almost the end of the summer. It's going fast for 2015. So before we get into tonight's slate, I wanted to discuss last night. There were a lot of good pitchers that threw last night. Of course, Clayton Kershaw was an absolute magician. Complete game, 3-hit shutout with 11 strikeouts. But at this point, who really expected anything more against the Mets? He accrued about 50 fantasy points on DraftKings, and I think he had close to 25 or maybe even, 9 innings, 3 hits, so no earned runs for FanDuel. That's 9. 11 strikeouts is 20. He had 24 fantasy points on FanDuel, which is really just incredible. Regardless of what his price was, he put pretty much everybody under their cash games last night, although he was heavily owned. But some other pitchers we talked about, Trevor Bauer did his normal Trevor Bauer thing, really. He had 9 strikeouts, but he gave up 6 earned runs. So he was rather mediocre. He didn't crush your lineups, but if you did have him, you were hoping for a little bit more upside. So a little bit less earned runs would have helped you there. But he did have a decent 9 spot on FanDuel, so it wasn't too bad if you had him in your GPP lineups. The other guy was Tyson Ross, and for 5 2/3 last night, he was probably one of the best pitchers on the planet for that time being. It was incredible. He had 8 strikeouts. I believe he had 7 strikeouts for the first 3 innings. But something happened at that 5 2/3 mark. And there were a couple of defensive miscues by his catcher, Austin Hedges. There were a few hits given up. And just like that, he gave up 4 earned runs in 5 2/3. And he ended up being just a tad undervalued. So although he didn't pitch very well as a whole, he was very good for the first 5 2/3. He just needs to get over that hump. Benny told me last night, we were discussing Tyson Ross. His MO seems to be he struggles to get through 6 innings. So let's hope that he can figure that out in future starts. But he did pitch well in the beginning, but the end result was not exactly what we wanted. So that being said, let's get into tonight. There are 14 games. There are 15 on the day, but one early game between the Cubs and the Phillies starts at 4 o'clock. So that's not included in the big slate, which we'll be talking about. But there's a lot of options to get into, so let's get right into it. Obviously, there's a ton of aces today. We look at Max Scherzer. We look at guys like Corey Kluber, Felix Hernandez, and Chris Archer. Now, of these 3, I probably won't be having much Felix Hernandez simply because his matchup is too tough, and there's other pitchers that are worth paying up for, and he's not the guy I'm going to be targeting in a tough matchup against the Blue Jays. I do love Kluber and Scherzer. I'm going to be paying up for them today, as a lot of other people will, but we don't really get into much detail about those 2 because everybody knows they're great pitchers at this point and have very high strikeout rates. The other guy is Chris Archer, who faces the Orioles, who can hit the ball a lot, but they do strike out a lot as well. So among those aces, I do like the top 3 of Kluber, Scherzer, and Archer. Probably will be chasing Scherzer and Kluber in my cash game tonight. But as always, there's some cheaper pitchers on every slate that we like to talk about. Those are the guys that are lower owned. Some of them are cheap, and they allow you to get some bats that you want. So let's get right into those cheap options. The top cheap guy that I like today, and I'm all over him. I absolutely will have him in a ton of my lineups. And that's Tim Cooney, left-handed pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, faces the Braves today. You've heard us talk about left-handed pitchers against the Braves before, and for good reason. They're one of the worst teams in baseball in terms of one matchup against another. You've heard me talk about when teams have a low batting average, slugging percentage, weighted on base average, an isolated power, and do strike out a lot against left or right-handed pitchers. I like to target that as a matchup, and the Braves have one of the worst in baseball. So they can't really hit lefties very well. They have a WOBA of 284, which is very low, but the number that strikes me the most is they have an isolated power rating of under 100, which is just absolutely absurd. That's the lowest of any split in baseball for an offense against one left-handed or right-handed pitcher. And it tells you that they're not hitting the ball hard or for power at all. And that's probably due to the loss of Freddie Freeman in their lineup. But he won't be in the lineup along with a lot of other of those lefties. So Tim Cooney today is a big option for me. Now, other than the matchup, Cooney's actually been very good this year. He has an ERA of just over 3. The strikeout rate is 22%. And one of the things that I like about him is he's incredibly cheap. So if you want to go with a Scherzer or a Kluber or even a Chris Archer, you're going to need another cheap pitcher in 2 pitcher sites simply because you're going to want to fit some Cincinnati bats or some Detroit bats today because you want to have the best of everything. Cooney allows you to do that because he's very cheap on every site. Now, on one pitcher sites like FanDuel, if you were to roll with Cooney at, I believe, $6,200, you pretty much have enough money to spend on whatever bat you want. So in tournaments, he'd be a very good option there because he can get strikeouts, he can work deep into the game. And I'm expecting the Cardinals to win that game, so he could get a 4-point bonus on FanDuel, which is huge. That being said, if he gets north of 12 or 13 fantasy points over on the FanDuel, you're saving $6,000 or $7,000 compared to those pitchers, and you might end up with the same total. So a guy like that could be huge for your tournament lineups tonight. And I will be using him as a SP2 in cash games if I choose to save on the second pitching spot. The other two guys I want to mention, the first one is Chris Tillman against Tampa Bay Rays. Now, earlier this year, Tillman was a guy that we like to target a lot against for our batters. But the one thing with Tillman is he's been excellent so far in the past couple of starts. His last 4 starts, he has 25 and 2/3 innings, only 4 earned runs, just 3 walks, and 24 strikeouts. That's really impressive. Now, that could be said he faced a weaker team or a team that had a lot of bench players in, but he's facing the Rays today, which is another good matchup. So I think he can keep that going. As you've heard us talk about before, right-handed pitchers against the Rays are always in play, especially a guy like Tillman who has been pitching well. Tampa Bay Rays have a very low batting average, very low slugging percentage against righties, and I made a chart this morning kind of putting at what certain pitchers struggle against. I'm going to post that on the RotoCurve forums after I put this segment through, but I show you that there's some pitchers that do have good matchups against certain lefties or righties, and some guys struggle with other things. And one thing that Tillman struggles with is right-handed power hitters. Now, that benefits him because Tampa Bay really doesn't have many power hitters from the right side. They do have Evan Longoria, who can hit a home run or two. And actually, I think he has a few home runs in his career off Tillman. But other than that, their team just really does not hit the ball out of the ballpark against right-handed hitters. So Tillman's weakness is something that the Rays don't have, and that makes it into a strength for him. And combined with the rest of the numbers that the Rays have and struggle against right-handed pitchers, I think Tillman could be a solid tournament play, and he will be very low owned today as well. The last pitcher I want to discuss was Andrew Cashner against the Miami Marlins. He pitches in Petco Park, which we've told you guys before, and I'm sure you guys understand that it's one of the better pitcher parks in baseball, simply because of the space that they have. There's not a lot of balls to go out in the outfield or deep into the stands for a home run. And you just heard me talk about, I looked at some pitchers and things that they struggle with. The thing that Cashner struggles with is he doesn't have the ability to keep the ball in the ballpark against left-handed power hitters. And when you look at the Marlins lineup, they have Justin Bour and they have Christian Yelich, but other than that, there's not too many guys that can hit the ball out of the ballpark. And that's one reason why I really do like Cashner today, because his weakness is something the Marlins don't possess. Now, the Marlins also have a ton of weaknesses themselves, and most of it is against right-handed pitching. They struggled even with D. Gordon and Giancarlo Stanton in the lineup. With both those two guys out, that lineup is one of the weakest in baseball. So Cashner should have a good matchup today, and he'll be a guy that I probably would be targeting as a contrarian option in cash games. And what that means as a teaching point is in head-to-heads, it's just one team against another team, and that's obviously what head-to-head means. But what that is normally most guys on a slate like today would probably roll with a Kluber and a Scherzer for head-to-heads because they get the two best options. But a contrarian option in a cash game would be a guy like Cashner, who has a great matchup and is likely to pitch deeper into the game and rack up some fantasy points. He's very consistent, and he doesn't have a very low ceiling. So he would be a guy that you could use for a cheaper value in these cash games. But I'm not recommending him in tournaments because his strikeout rate is rather high, but it's been a lot lower than what he has been in his career. So he looks like he's pitching more to contact. So I don't really like his upside as much in tournaments, but I could use him as a starting pitcher too in cash games. There are two other pitchers that showed up in my research, and I just want to discuss them real quick. Manny Benuelos, I love his matchup tonight, and I love him as a pitcher, but he doesn't pitch more than 5 innings, which I don't think makes sense to put in an upside play because simply you need a guy that's going to go deep in the game to get a lot of strikeouts. So it wouldn't make much sense to use a guy like Benuelos simply because he's on a bit of a pitch count. He's not throwing more than top 5 innings as he recovers from Tommy John surgery. The other guy is Dan Herron. A lot of guys have discussed him in the industry today. He has a very high xFIP, which is expected fielder independent pitching. And what that means is if one of those numbers is high and his ERA is low, which is Herron's case, it means they're due for regression. Now, that being said, he does face the Padres today, who are one of the worst offenses in baseball of late, and he's really good against right-handed hitters, but against lefties he struggles. So I think that I wouldn't be targeting him as much because he would only be a GPP play for me, but he doesn't have that strikeout rate or the upside, so it wouldn't make much sense for me to do that. So that wraps up the pitchers I do like today. In my cash games, I will have Kluber and Scherzer everywhere, probably mix in some Cooney, and maybe in some head-to-heads have some Cashner as well. But I'm going to be going with those two high-priced pitchers in most of my cash games if we can find some cheaper bats. But that being said, if I really want to target those that Rockies game with the Cincinnati Reds and the Detroit Tigers later, I'm going to have to go with a cheap starting pitcher too, which will be Tim Cooney. In my tournaments for tonight, I'll have a lot of Cooney, I'll have a lot of Chris Tillman, and Andrew Cashner as well. So a mix between those three, probably more so Cooney and Tillman will be in my tournament lineups, and I will obviously throw in some Scherzer, some Kluber, maybe some Chris Archer in tournaments as well because of their strikeout upside. That brings us to the end of our segment, so be sure to remember to check out the MLB lineups page on RotoCurve because that makes a big difference. I talk about it each day that if there's a team with a lineup that's very thin, I guess we could say, if there's a lot of backup players, maybe their stars getting a day off or so, keep that in mind because that could upgrade the pitcher for that team. Also keep in mind that with a lot of games tonight, the weather is going to be a big factor. So make sure to look out for Danielle's weather videos. Will be up later on the site. Continue to use that and all the rest of the tools here at RotoCurve to win you some money on Friday night. Good luck, everybody.